Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today, and I have a Scuffed meta snapshot to share with you. These are the decks that I think are pretty good at the moment after the recent patch that's come in. Now let's start things off, of course, with SHURI. This is probably no surprise, but I'm putting this deck in tier 1. I think SHURI is really powerful now that Arrow's been nerfed. There's a lot less counterplay. You can still deal with SHURI in certain ways. You can play things like Valkyrie, Iron Man, maybe you just try to outpoint them with your own deck, with Thanos or something. But I think SHURI is in a really good spot with these recent changes. So you've got, of course, SHURI on Red Skull. You can do SHURI on Vision, is a very powerful play, or even Captain Marvel if you want to try that card. And then there's, of course, Taskmaster to copy the buff. I've put in Magneto instead of Arrow here because I think the Arrow is quite a bit weaker, and Magneto gives you another unit that you can buff with the SHURI. Or you can disrupt, you can move stuff around those 3 costs to help you win the game potentially. So I think that's a good option. You can always do the Taskmaster She-Hulk lane as well. This deck should be really well positioned in the meta, I think, currently. Next up, we have a deck that's been winning some tournaments recently, and it should be well positioned in the meta right now. It's a Thanos deck that doesn't run Leech, apparently, which may or may not be good, but you've got Arrow in there still, can deal with some of the meta decks. The SHURI, the Galactus will be very strong on this patch. So there's a lot of power here. The idea is to play Death, you play Killmonger, you kill all of your stones, you play that Death very cheaply, maybe you play a wave as well to disrupt the opponent and also get that power on the board. And then you've got just some really nice Doctor Doom Odin stuff going on, which you usually wouldn't want to play in Thanos because you've got all the stones on the board. But here, when you've got lots of space, the Doctor Doom becomes a lot better. So I see this being one of the better, if not the best, Thanos build at the moment, and probably we'll see this deck become quite popular in the meta, I would imagine, and will end up being one of the top tier decks. Next up, another big bad that's benefited greatly from the changes, the recent nerfs. We have Galactus. Now, of course, without Arrow being in the meta, there's significantly less ways for you to deal with Galactus. So you've got that Daredevil, you've got Electro Wave, you're maybe even playing Kang to see what the opponent does as well later on in the game. And yeah, Galactus is going to be a real powerhouse, able to get cubes consistently, I think, with quite a high win rate. You might want to run America Chavez in here just to more reliably get that Galactus combo going. That's definitely a card you can consider perhaps instead of Kang or as well as Kang. But yeah, Galactus positioning here in the meta seems to be very good as well. So I would say these are the top 3 decks, of course. A lot of them requiring those pool 4 and 5 cards, but that is to be expected. Okay, let's jump into the tier 2 decks now. So the first tier 2 deck that I have here is Jeff Hoogland's Bounce DARKHAWK deck. This should have a fairly good time into Thanos decks because you've got the Black Widow, you've got the CLOG, and just LOCKJAW in general is going to suffer when you give them a rock or 2 or 3 with that bounce. And then you play that DARKHAWK with such a full deck. So I think this deck's very decent into Thanos. If you want it to be better into things like SHURI, you could consider running Valkyrie. I may have a video coming on that style of deck at some point, but Valkyrie, very good option, or Shang-Chi just as a way to deal with tall units. This deck's really going to struggle against Galactus. That could be a big issue, and just SHURI, yeah, without some kind of tech card is going to be a struggle, which is why I think this is more of a tier 2 deck. Very high power level deck, but some matchups in the meta I think are going to be tough for it at the moment. Next, I've got the sort of standard Thanos shell that was being played last patch, although with some changes, with the Arrow being nerfed, the Quinjet being nerfed. You don't need to run those cards anymore, so instead you can play something like Vision, which I think is quite a solid card, pulled from LOCKJAW. Being able to move it sort of supplements gives you a bit of the movement that you're now lacking because of Space Stone nerf. So I think this style, you've got armor as well there to counteract some Killmongers and Shang-Chi's and things like that. So I think this kind of a Thanos build should also be should still be pretty strong, I should say. So feel free to give that a try. Next up in tier 2, I have Cozy's Silver Surfer deck, which I'm not sure if it's super popular, but I saw Jeff Hoogland playing it on stream, so perhaps this deck will become a bit more popular in the meta by the time this video comes out. But this is a Silver Surfer Thanos deck, so the idea is you can use Energy Stone to play a turn 2 Storm, perhaps. Energy Stone turn 1, ramping into Storm into a 3-drop is very powerful. Maybe a Juggernaut, push the opponent out of the Storm lane. You can also do Energy Stone on turn 4 to go into turn 5 and play 2 3-drops into that Silver Surfer at the end. So there's some really nice lines with this deck. It's also running the new Negasonic Teenage Warhead card, although I don't think that's absolutely necessary, but it is good with Daredevil. Daredevil Professor X combo is also really nice with the Thanos stones protecting them from Killmonger. So this deck's a very cool one. I think it's actually quite powerful Maybe tier 3 worthy, but maybe I think tier 2 is probably fair. I think it's got some decent matchups into the meta here with the Storm and the Juggernaut and things like that. So very good. I've also got to place SAURON SHURI in tier 2. This deck's sort of taken a hit with the change to Red Skull. You don't really care so much about getting that negative ongoing effect taken away with SAURON. But I think SAURON SHURI is still a decent deck if you want to try it with Typhoid Mary and Ebony Maw and that kind of stuff. Can do a surprising amount of damage, although you're going to be more vulnerable to the likes of Valkyrie, Shang-Chi without Cosmo. And it can be a little less consistent, I would say, but SAURON should still be a very good option for Shuri. Another deck that I've got in tier 2, which could arguably be a tier 3 deck, I'm not really sure on it, is SERA Control, SERA Miracle, whatever you want to call it. This is a toxic version with Luke Cage and Hazmat, which I think is quite strong, honestly. It might even be the best way to play SERA. I haven't played a whole lot of SERA Control, but I've not been a huge fan of the deck in general, especially with Leech being in the meta. It really shuts down SERA, so as long as Leech isn't super prevalent, then SERA should be pretty good. You can shut down the likes of the tool units with Shang-Chi. Often you can run Killmonger in SERA decks to destroy the 1 cost as well and cover all of your bases, but with this version, the idea is instead to negate the strength of the stones or whatever it might be on the side of the opponent's board using that Hazmat, Wong, Absorbing Man combo, Luke Cage on your side. So pretty interesting deck here. Of course, typical SERA Control, you've probably seen what that already looks like at this point, but this version is quite a cool take on that if you want to give it a try. And finally in tier 2, I have another style of Galactus deck, this time with Nimrod. I don't know if this deck should be in tier 2. I don't know if this is even that popular of a deck. I was debating whether putting a Electro sort of style of Nimrod, if that's more popular than a Galactus style, but I think Nimrod is seeing some play, especially now that Arrow's out of the meta. You know, Shang-Chi doesn't hurt Nimrod too much, so it's quite a solid option, I think, and this style of Nimrod should be pretty good into the field. Of course, Nimrod is decent into Galactus as well. It's decent into Shuri, I think, because you play your own Shuri, so you can also sort of contend with what they're doing a bit. You can maybe just play Nimrod Galactus as well, which is hard to disrupt now that there's no Arrow in the meta, so this should be probably a solid deck. I'm not sure if it's that popular, again, as I said. Maybe Electro Nimrod, Electro Ramp sort of style with Odin, Doctor Doom is a bit more popular, but hopefully this deck's still pretty decent. Now heading into tier 3, I think CLOG is now a tier 3 deck. It was a lot better last patch, but with the change to Aero making that a significantly weaker card that the deck still probably does want to run because of that movement clogging up a lane. CLOG is going to struggle a bit. I think there's the death version of Thanos doesn't care so much about CLOG because you can destroy all the ones. And of course, this deck doesn't typically have a great matchup into Shuri, so yeah, CLOG I think took a real hit with this nerf patch that came, and should still be an okay deck. I think it can do some cheeky things, but with the way the meta's looking, probably not going to be your best bet for climbing. Of course, we have good old trusty PATRIOT in here as well. Solid, reliable deck that is pretty much always going to be in the tier 3, I guess. It just does what it does well. Arrow, it didn't really care that much about. Killmonger is definitely more of a threat. I think this deck won't be super good into things like Galactus and Shuri. So yeah, it's sort of just more of a mid. You know, you can win against bots and against the random decks that you sometimes encounter on a ladder, but if you're going up against the top tier decks, the win rate here isn't going to be great. Similar with the CLOG deck. Another tier 3 deck I've got here is LOCKJAW. I'm not sure if this is tier 2 or tier 3. Of course, you have the Leech with the LOCKJAW and just raw power. It's sort of like a Thanos deck, but without some of the upside of the stones, but a bit more consistent. Arguably could see this being tier 2. LOCKJAW is just a very solid deck, a very solid build, although it can be a little tricky to climb with sometimes as you need to draw that LOCKJAW. You need that option, which can be a little inconsistent. As you probably know from playing Thanos, if you've played Thanos at all. But yeah, LOCKJAW, I like it. It's a good deck. It's probably one of the better tier 3 decks here. And finally in tier 3, we have good old CEREBRO 2s, which actually stand to benefit quite greatly from the recent nerfs. Of course, Storm is now a much stronger card because you don't have the move stone moving stuff around all the time. So there's maybe an angle for CEREBRO 2s to be a decent deck here. I think it's just a solid one in general, especially when Enchantress isn't in the meta. But of course, you're going to run into trouble with certain locations and that kind of stuff. Going to be difficult to compete with the likes of Shuri, although you maybe can go for Iron Man, Mystique or something like that to try to compete there. But yeah, difficult one, but I think a solid tier 3 deck. And finally, I wasn't sure where to put this deck. This is Ocean Mud's tournament deck. He won a tournament with this ATTUMA tempo style deck. You're playing things like Storm and Professor X along with Claw, which is a very cheeky combo. You can just get ahead of you know, the likes of Doctor Doom and stuff, if those do come in. I'm not sure how this deck plays. I haven't played it, I haven't seen it on ladder, so I'm giving it an honorable mention. It might become popular. I couldn't really see, you know, I think it looks like a decent deck, and since it won a tournament against some top tier decks, then perhaps this could be something that shows its head in the meta, but hard to say for now. Thanks very much for watching, guys. That's my meta snapshot. Let me know if you think I did a good or bad job, and let me know what you think of the recent nerfs, how the meta's looking. I'll be very interested to read your comments. With that being said, do subscribe as always for more content, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.